I never thought I'd be humiliated by my own child on his happiest day. At the lavish wedding venue, surrounded by towering floral arrangements and soft candlelight, my daughter-in-law Ashley stood at the entrance in her ivory lace gown. Her face was perfectly composed, but her eyes were sharp. I hadn't even made it past the front doors. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You weren't invited. Please leave." For a second, I stood there frozen. My chest tightened as dozens of heads slowly turned toward me. The guests, people I had helped pay to be here, whispered behind manicured hands and exchanged wide-eyed glances. Some smiled awkwardly, pretending not to hear. A few even looked amused. Daniel, my son, stood a few feet behind her. He didn't speak. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. The silence between us sliced cleaner than any words ever could. "I see," I answered, voice steady enough to annoy her. No tremor, no plead, only a faint, polite smile. My final wedding gift. Slowly, I turned on the soft-lit marble and walked back down the carpeted steps, each footfall deliberate, controlled. Behind me, whispers ricocheted like flung rice. "Wasn't that his mom? Did you film it? Send it to me." Who does that to family? Cold night air met my cheeks, drying the single tear that had dared escape. The parking lot glittered with luxury sedans, another line item on the ledger of things I'd guaranteed for Daniel's happiness. I reached my modest hatchback, rested my palms on its faded paint, and let the silence answer the question everyone inside refused to ask. Why would a son erase the woman who paid his way? Because he could. Because trust makes an easy weapon when someone loves you more than you deserve. I slid into the driver's seat, hands oddly still on the steering wheel. No shaky breaths, no frantic phone calls, just a spreading awareness that the rules had changed and I was the last to notice. If they could erase me from a guest list, they could erase me from anything. My dignity, my savings, even the story of how Daniel came this far. The engine coughed awake. Headlights carved a path through manicured hedges, while distant music swelled behind glass walls that were never meant to include me. As I pulled onto the main road, my reflection glimmered in the rearview mirror. Composed, eyes dry, mouth set. They expected me to shatter. I would not oblige. Instead, I whispered into the empty car, "What is love without respect?" The words felt heavier than any bouquet. They settled over me like armor. By the time the venue lights shrank in my mirror, resolution had already taken root. Tomorrow would belong to lawyers, to contracts bearing my untouched signature, to icy numbers that didn't flinch at betrayal. Tonight, though, I allowed myself one last calm confession. Trust is a gift, and I was done handing it to thieves. Back at my modest home, the silence greeted me like an old friend. I set my clutch down on the small oak table by the door, the same one Daniel used to bang his little toy cars on when he was a boy. Funny how small things like that come back to you at times like this. I slipped off my shoes carefully, not out of habit, but because my legs still trembled beneath the weight of what had just happened. I sat in my favorite armchair, worn at the edges but sturdy, and let the emptiness settle. The house smelled faintly of lavender, from the sachets I always tucked into the linen drawers. It was safe here. Honest. Unlike what I had just walked away from. How did we get here? How did it get this bad? The truth is, I made Daniel's life possible. I was the one who scraped together savings to send him to college. I was the one who co-signed his first mortgage. When Ashley wanted her dream wedding, I wrote check after check. Never alone. Always a gift. Because that's what mothers do. That's what I thought, at least. But somewhere along the way, I became an outsider in the very life I helped them build. Ashley made that perfectly clear from the start. She smiled at me when she had to, but there was always something cold behind her politeness. A quiet disapproval, as if I were some outdated relic she tolerated because Daniel insisted. And Daniel, he was always eager to keep the peace. His silence became his loyalty to her. I never fought back. Not once. I stayed quiet, gracious, accommodating. I thought if I kept giving, they'd eventually see my worth not as a wallet, but as family. But today proved what I was too afraid to admit. They never loved me. Not really. They loved what I could give. And the moment they no longer needed me to fund the show, they shut the door. The next morning, Gloria came by. Just like she always did after big family events. She knew before I even opened the door. News traveled fast in this town. She stood there holding a cake box, wearing that worried little smile of hers. "I brought lemon," she said gently, stepping inside. "Your favorite." I managed a small nod, motioning her toward the kitchen. The kettle was already hot. Gloria didn't ask right away. She never did. She waited, sitting quietly at my table while I poured the tea, my hands steady despite the storm still swirling inside me. "It was public, wasn't it?" she finally asked, her voice low. I couldn't hold her gaze. "It was deliberate," she sighed, shaking her head. "Ashley." That one name carried so much weight between us. I sipped my tea, carefully placing the cup back on its saucer before I spoke again. "You know, I was never actually disinvited," I said softly, "because I was never included in the first place." The words hung there, and for the first time, they sounded even colder out loud than they had in my mind. Gloria reached across the table, placing her warm hand over mine. "You raised him better than this." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure that was true anymore. Because what kind of man watches his mother be humiliated and says nothing? What kind of son lets his wife dictate who belongs in his family? I stared at the soft flicker of the candle burning on my kitchen windowsill, watching the wax pool slowly at its base. I thought if I helped enough, if I paid for enough, I would be safe. Gloria's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, love that depends on your wallet isn't love." I swallowed hard, feeling that bitter lump rise in my throat again. "They love my money more than me." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and the truth of it stung worse than any humiliation at that wedding. Gloria squeezed my hand tighter. "Being alone is better than being used." I blinked hard, pushing back the sting in my eyes. The truth was, I wasn't entirely alone. Not with friends like her. Not anymore. But inside, a different feeling was taking root. Quiet. Slow. But certain. I would not let this be my ending. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, my phone rang. Daniel. His name lit up the screen like a beacon, and for a moment I almost didn't answer. But curiosity, or perhaps habit, got the better of me. I slid my finger across the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice tight, forced into a tone of casual warmth. How are you?" I let the silence hang a beat longer than usual. "I'm well, Daniel. Enjoying the peace, actually." He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, well look, I wanted to call and apologize for what happened earlier." There it was. The obligatory apology. No specifics, no ownership. Just enough to say he'd made the call. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to see where this was going. We didn't mean for it to come out like that," he continued, his words stumbling. "Ashley was just stressed. You know how weddings are. Stressed. That was the excuse. Not deliberate. Not cruel. Just stressed." Still, I stayed calm. Of course, these things happen. Another pause, and then his real reason emerged. "Actually, while I've got you," he said, his voice lowering a little, "I was hoping you could help finalize the last installment of the wedding fund. You know, just to get everything squared away now that the big day's behind us." There it was. He didn't think I knew. Didn't know that Ashley never saw the contracts. Didn't know I'd paid only partial deposits. Didn't know that final payments still sat pending under my name. Every florist, every caterer, every vendor was still waiting on my authorization to release those funds. I kept my voice soft, neutral. "Of course, Daniel. I'll take a look at it tomorrow." "Great." His relief was palpable. "Ashley's parents are a little anxious to make sure everything's settled, you know." I almost smiled. Not at his words, but at the way the desperation bled through them. "I understand completely," I said, my voice smooth. "I wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone." The call ended with him thanking me again, overly gracious, as if trying to patch over the public wound with syrupy charm. But the moment I set my phone down, I sat back in my chair and let the truth settle fully into place. They didn't exclude me because they didn't need me anymore. They excluded me because they thought they'd already gotten everything they needed, except they hadn't. Not yet. The house was quiet again as I sat at my little desk by the window. The wedding binder sat where I left it months ago, neatly stacked contracts, receipts, and vendor agreements. Every dollar Ashley had spent so confidently was still tethered to one unspoken truth. They needed my signature. I flipped through the papers slowly, my fingertips brushing over the bold headers. Venue, caterer, florist, band. Every one of them listed my name as the primary client. The invoices all read the same: 30% deposit received, remaining balance due upon client's final authorization. They must have assumed I paid it all months ago. Ashley probably never even bothered to read the fine print. She saw the towering cakes and imported orchids arriving and believed everything was already taken care of. She believed her parents had contributed, and what I provided was just extra. She didn't know that most of what she flaunted at that wedding was still technically hanging by a thread I controlled. I had protected myself from the beginning. Quietly. Cautiously. When Daniel first asked me to contribute, I made sure every vendor contract required my final sign-off for full payment. My estate planner had advised me to do it that way, just in case. At the time, I thought I was being overly cautious. Now I saw it for what it really was: survival. The numbers were staggering. The florist alone still had $40,000 outstanding. The imported Phalaenopsis orchids from Singapore had already arrived at JFK Customs, waiting for clearance. I imagined Ashley's face when those calls started coming. They thought they could cut me out while still living off what I built. They wanted the image, the luxury, the perfect wedding. But they forgot one simple fact: I never handed them full control. Returning to the table, I created a spreadsheet: vendor, balance, due date, freeze code, contact person. A war map sketched in cells and columns. Roadmap indeed. At 9 p.m., I dialed the estate planner's after-hours line. She sounded sleepy but alert, the voice of someone accustomed to midnight crises over wills and weddings. "Patricia," she greeted. "Trouble?" "Not trouble," I said. "Proof of concept." I explained the situation in clipped sentences, neutrally, as if reading weather data. When I finished, she whistled a single low note. "You want to proceed tonight?" "I want the mechanism ready," I clarified. "We may need to act fast Monday if they try anything creative." She promised draft notices by sunrise. We hung up, professionalism sealing the conversation like wax on parchment. Comfort. I sat back and let a strange peace settle over me. The storm outside cracked thunder, but inside the only lightning was the cursor blinking at the end of the spreadsheet. Steady, patient, waiting for the next entry. Sometimes protection feels like loneliness. Tonight it felt like competence. I printed duplicate sets of every contract, slid them into plastic sleeves, and labeled a fresh binder. Evidence. Lawyers love order, and I had a feeling order would soon be in short supply at Daniel's honeymoon suite. The next afternoon, I went to the community center for our seniors' luncheon. It was a simple comfort: the familiar chatter, the same chipped teacups, and the slow warmth of people who didn't pretend. We sat in the back corner, where I usually shared a table with Margaret and Helen, both widows like me, both having lived through enough family messes to recognize when one of us carried a certain heaviness. Helen reached over, placing a soft biscuit onto my plate. "You didn't look yourself this morning." I gave her a small smile, folding my hands neatly in my lap. Family drama. Her brow lifted knowingly. "Aren't they always?" Margaret, sharper, more direct, leaned forward. "Does it involve money?" I blinked at her, surprised by how quickly she hit the nerve. "They usually do when the children are involved," she added softly. "Trust me." The room buzzed softly around us, bingo numbers being called, laughter at another table. But here, our conversation settled into something more serious. more intimate. They think I'm weak because I stay quiet, I admitted. Because I don't argue. Margaret shook her head. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means smart. You learn to hold your cards close. Helen nodded, her voice low. You hold everything they think they control. That's why they smile at you while they sharpen the knives. I swallowed. I never thought they'd weaponize my trust like this. Margaret's voice was firm. They will always weaponize your love if you let them. They count on your guilt to keep you obedient. For a moment, I simply stared at my untouched biscuit, feeling a strange mixture of grief and clarity. What would you do? I asked softly. Helen didn't hesitate. Protect what's yours. Quietly. Make sure they never see it coming. And that's when it truly sank in. I had always believed love meant forgiving, giving, and sacrificing. That was my mistake. That was what they counted on. But love without respect isn't love at all. I'd given enough. Now it was time to protect myself. By Friday morning, the calm in my apartment was deliberate. Every inch of silence had been scrubbed and polished into readiness. The banker's lamp glowed again as I sat with my estate planner Marissa over a secure video call. Her sharp eyes scanned the documents while I sipped coffee, both of us moving like chess partners who'd studied each other's style for years. Authorization withdrawal phrase is in place, Marissa confirmed. Any attempt to process the pending balances will trigger automatic fraud alerts and hard holds. Your verification card is now effectively dead to the system. The phrase sat there on my screen, simple and absolute. Authorization withdrawn, suspected fraud. 3 words. After everything, after the years of sacrifices, the gentle enabling, the endless forgiving, it came down to 3 clinical words capable of freezing an entire event in its gilded tracks. You understand, Marissa continued gently. They may try to challenge this, perhaps even legally, once the panic sets in. I nodded. Good, let them. My tone stayed neutral. Not bravado, not bitterness, but steady confidence. I'm not frightened of discovery. I've kept every document, every message. The facts won't shift just because emotions flare. She gave a small, approving nod. You've left no gaps. If anything, Patricia, you're overprepared. Good, I said again, softer this time. Overprepared feels like warmth after how cold they've made me feel. Recognition. For anyone who's ever handed their financial trust to family, believing in their better angels, only to discover those angels negotiate terms when you're at your most vulnerable. I see you. This isn't just paperwork. This is survival. After we ended the call, I turned off the lamp but stayed seated, letting the hum of the refrigerator fill the room. I pictured Daniel and Ashley sipping cocktails on white sand, assuming the paperwork behind them had already bowed in submission. The naivete might have been almost sweet once. Not anymore. By noon, I visited the bank in person. No proxies, no appointments arranged by helpful family. The branch manager, Mr. Riley, greeted me warmly. We've added full dual verification to your savings, investment, and inheritance accounts. Any external requests will hit an automatic barrier until personally authorized by you in writing in this office. Thank you, I said. My voice stayed level but inside. Relief bloomed like the first breath after a long underwater swim. Fraud attempts from within families are rising, Riley added softly, eyes kind but knowing. Especially after inheritances shift. Your preparation puts you far ahead of most. Saturday morning arrived with sunshine that felt almost inappropriate. It gleamed through my windows as if nothing were unraveling beneath the surface of our family. The orchids on my balcony swayed gently, unbothered by looming unpaid customs fees miles away. The doorbell rang. A soft, polite chime. When I opened it, there he stood, Daniel. He held a glossy bouquet of hydrangeas and lilies, the kind meant to signal warmth without directly addressing wrongdoing. Flowers that scream, "Let's smooth this over." "Mom!" He beamed, as if the rooftop exile never happened. "Surprise visit!" His eyes scanned me, checking, calculating, rehearsing lines he probably practiced during the drive over. I stepped aside, motioning him in wordlessly. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and lavender oil. I watched him absorb the calm, as if testing whether I was still angry. But I wasn't angry. Anger had no place in the room now, only consequence. "You look wonderful," he offered too brightly. "Relaxed." "I am," I answered, motioning for him to sit. He lowered himself onto the couch, carefully placing the bouquet on my coffee table like a peace treaty signed with petals. Then came the small talk. Weather, the honeymoon resort, how spectacular everything still was. I let him rattle on, nodding occasionally, offering mild smiles that revealed nothing. And then, just as predictably as I knew he would, Daniel shifted gears. His voice dropped into that concerned, slightly paternal tone he used when pretending to advise me for my own good. "Mom, I've been thinking," he started. "With everything going on lately, you've got so many different accounts and paperwork to juggle. And I know it's stressful, trying to manage things alone." I sipped my tea and waited. He leaned in, lowering his voice further, as if sharing a compassionate secret. "Ashley and I were talking. It might be time to simplify things a bit for you. Consolidate some of your financial accounts. Move things into a more centralized structure. Easier oversight, less risk of mistakes." There it was, the rehearsed pitch, dressed up as concern, but wearing control like cheap perfume. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said softly, setting my teacup down with a delicate clink. "But I'm quite comfortable with my arrangements. Everything is well managed." His smile strained. Of course. But you know, sometimes these things get confusing as people get older." He meant as you get weaker. But I stayed neutral. Neutral is disarming. "Confusion comes from lack of planning, Daniel," I said, my voice gentle but weighted. "Fortunately, I've been planning carefully for some time." His cheeks reddened just slightly, a flash of frustration breaking through the practiced charm. He wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't flinch. "You know you can trust me, right?" he added, almost pleading now. "We're family." I smiled fully for the first time. "Trust, Daniel, is not inherited, it's earned." That landed. I watched his throat tighten as he swallowed, and for a moment, silence expanded between us like a glass wall. He could see me but not touch me. Not anymore. After a few more empty pleasantries, he rose. "Well, just think about it, okay?" He gestured to the flowers like a final bargaining chip. "I will," I promised softly, walking him to the door. "Have a safe drive home." When the door clicked shut behind him, I exhaled, not from relief, but from certainty. His desperation had crossed the threshold into something raw. They didn't realize yet how far ahead I was. The next few days, Daniel's messages started coming like clockwork. Articles about financial planning for seniors, friendly suggestions about consolidating investments, even a video link titled, "How to Simplify Estate Management for Your Aging Parents." Each message was laced with that same sugary tone, masking the sharp hook beneath. I responded to every one of them with mild interest, never closing the door outright, but never committing either. "Interesting article, Daniel. I'll ask my advisor what she thinks. Yes, I've been meaning to review my accounts. Thank you for the reminder." Each polite reply bought me another day. Another step closer to being fully ready. In between these exchanges, I met with my lawyer again. Diane was efficient, sharp, and utterly unfazed as she reviewed my growing folder of documentation. I handed her printouts of every message Daniel had sent. "Good," she said, scanning the texts quickly. "Keep them coming. Every one of these will support your case if they ever try to claim guardianship later." Her words landed like quiet armor being fastened around me. I nodded. They don't even realize they're building my defense for me. Diane looked up, a faint smile on her lips. Exactly. I had spent my life being accommodating, being generous, believing that if I kept giving, I'd eventually be loved for who I was, not for what I could offer. But now I saw it clearly. They weren't trying to take care of me. They were trying to position me, slowly shift control while disguising it as concern. And for years, I might have let them. Not anymore. Now every quiet reply, every polite nod, was a brick in the wall I was building between their greed and my freedom. Monday morning arrived like an uninvited guest I'd been expecting. The sun cast thin gold stripes across my living room floor, gliding over the binder of evidence waiting calmly on my desk. Today, the vendors would start noticing. I made tea and sat in my armchair, phone nearby but untouched. No texts yet. Not from Daniel. Not yet. The quiet hum of pending disaster was almost melodic. By noon, the first call came. Not from him, but from Marissa, my estate planner. "Patricia," she greeted, voice steady. "We've been contacted by the venue's accounting department. They've submitted formal inquiries, requesting confirmation for release of funds." "And?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "We triggered the fraud lock as planned. They've been informed payment is frozen, pending investigation of irregularities." "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "Document everything." "I already have. The paper trail is solid. You've left them no loose threads to pull." Comfort. Her words felt like a shield tightening around me. For so long, I had wondered if I was simply being overly cautious, too cold, too meticulous. Now, that careful preparation was standing firm, where emotion might have crumbled. By 3 p.m., the florist called. My personal line. Not Daniel's. She sounded polite but clearly rattled. "Mrs. Green, I apologize for reaching out directly. We've encountered an issue processing the final customs payment for the floral imports. The orchids have arrived at JFK, but the clearance fees remain outstanding. We were told you were overseeing the account. Is there any update you can provide?" Her tone danced delicately between panic and professionalism. I recognized it. Vendors who'd been promised full payment were now grasping at any possible reassurance. I kept my voice warm but controlled. "Thank you for your diligence. I'm aware of the situation. At this time, there's a hold on all disbursements. I'll notify the appropriate parties once internal concerns are resolved." She hesitated. "Respectfully, Mrs. Green, if we can't clear customs soon, we risk the shipment being seized or destroyed." I let the pause stretch before answering gently. "I understand. Unfortunately, that's out of my control for now." She thanked me, still hopeful I might soften, but I knew that hope wouldn't last much longer. By 5 p.m., Daniel's name finally flashed on my phone again. This time, I answered. "Mom," he burst out immediately. "Why didn't you tell me there was some kind of problem?" The florist just called Ashley's father in a panic. "They're saying payments are frozen. What's going on?" His voice carried that raw mix of fear and forced authority. He wanted control, but the slipping was audible. I exhaled softly. "What's going on, Daniel, is exactly what you orchestrated. Exclusion. You made financial arrangements assuming I would quietly fund and validate everything without question. You chose to cut me out." "That's not true." I cut him off, still calm. "It's entirely true. You didn't forget to include me, Daniel. You chose not to. And choices have consequences. You are embarrassing us." His voice cracked. "Ashley's parents are furious. These vendors are calling them, calling me. This is getting out of hand." "No, Daniel," I said, my tone firming like poured concrete. "You are the one who let it get out of hand. You assumed love would equal obligation forever. But love without respect is no contract I'll honor." His breath hitched. "Mom, you're ruining everything." "No, Daniel." My voice was soft now, deadly soft. "I'm simply withdrawing what was never appreciated. That isn't ruin, that's correction." There was nothing more for him to say. The silence on his end was heavier than any words. The more I watched Daniel, the more the fog lifted. For so many years, I held on to the image of the boy I raised, the sweet child who once clung to my hand at the doctor's office, who cried when his puppy went missing, who swore he'd always take care of me when he grew up. But that boy was gone. What stood in his place was someone colder, sharper, more calculating, and the more I saw it, the more I realized this wasn't all Ashley. Ashley had simply given him permission to become what he was already willing to be. He didn't just want my money. He wanted my control, my independence, my usefulness. Without my usefulness, I was disposable. I sat alone that night, sipping my tea, the light from the kitchen window casting long shadows across the room. And for the first time, I allowed myself to speak the truth aloud, even if only to the silence. "You don't love me," I whispered. "You love what I can provide." The words didn't break me. They freed me, because once you stop believing the lie that love is unconditional, no matter how you're treated, you finally see the people around you for who they really are. Ashley wasn't the problem. Daniel wasn't a victim. He had made his choice. And now I was making mine. A week later, I met Diane at her office one final time, before we initiated the full transfer. The legal documents lay neatly stacked on the polished mahogany table, layers of protection meticulously crafted, layers Daniel would never untangle. I slid my reading glasses down my nose as Diane carefully explained every clause. "Your charitable foundation is fully active," she said. "It now holds the majority of your liquid assets and property holdings. You remain sole chairperson, but there are provisions in place that ensure nobody, not family, not spouses, not guardians, can access or redirect these funds without unanimous board consent." I nodded, calm. "And your trust," she continued, tapping the second folder, "is airtight, irrevocable. Successor trustees are fully independent, and with the legal oversight we've built in, no one can pressure or manipulate you into amendments down the road." She paused. "Even if they try to claim emotional distress or mental incompetence later, this structure will stand." I exhaled softly. For years, I had been the one handing over everything with blind faith, believing that love would protect me. Now I understood what protects you. Paperwork, legal walls, quiet, unbreakable structures built behind smiles and polite nods. Diane leaned forward slightly. "When the time comes, if they push, we have enough documentation of their behavior to make any legal challenge extremely costly." I thought of Daniel's texts, his subtle manipulations, all safely printed, signed, dated, and logged. "They won't even want to try," I said softly. Diane smiled. "Exactly." When the final signatures were complete, she handed me my copies, neatly bound. It all fit into one slim briefcase, yet it carried the weight of my freedom. Outside her office, the world went on as usual. Cars passed, people hurried down sidewalks. No one knew that inside that building, everything had shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting to be loved correctly. I was untouchable now. By Thursday, the unraveling had accelerated, and I didn't have to lift a single finger to make it happen. The florist left Ashley 3 voicemails that morning, according to Marissa's forwarded notes. The orchids, those absurd imported phalaenopsis Ashley had insisted on for her grand Instagram-perfect wedding, were now sitting in refrigerated custom storage at JFK. The daily holding fees alone were climbing into the thousands. Customs wouldn't hold them forever. Soon, they would be destroyed. And that wasn't even the worst of it. Marissa called again late in the afternoon, her voice sharper this time. "Patricia, you'll want to know. The venue has formally issued breach of contract notifications to both Daniel and Ashley's parents. They've forwarded the notices to Daniel's employer." I stilled. "His employer?" "Yes. His new position was partially negotiated through a connection at Ashley's father's firm, remember? The venue wants to pressure every available lever before escalating through litigation." There it was, the deeper rot beneath the glittering facade. They had built their entire social climb on borrowed favors, on the appearance of stability funded by me. And now that appearance was beginning to fracture in ways no apology could patch. The fallout reached further than unpaid flowers or catering bills now. This was touching careers, status, the very currency Ashley's family valued most. I sat quietly, digesting the weight of it. "Have any of them reached out to you directly?" Marissa's tone softened. "No, not since Ashley's mother. I believe they now understand the futility of trying to pressure you. You've sealed every possible door." I exhaled deeply. It wasn't victory I felt. It was the long, cool breath of someone who finally stepped off a burning plank and landed safely on solid ground. That evening, Daniel called again. I answered this time. His voice was stripped of charm, of excuses, just raw, tight panic. "Mom, everything's falling apart." I didn't speak. I let him fill the space. Ashley's parents are furious. Her father says I've embarrassed the entire family. My job offer. It's under review now. People at work are hearing rumors. His voice broke for a second before hardening again. "Mom, please. Just release the payments. You can still fix this." "Fix?" My voice was low, steady. "Daniel, you want me to fix something I wasn't even allowed to be part of?" "That was Ashley," he tried. "It wasn't me." "No, Daniel. You stood there. You let it happen. You didn't forget me by accident. You erased me by choice. And now that the weight of those choices has shifted, you want my rescue." "Mom, I didn't know it would spiral like this, but you were willing to risk it." I cut him off softly. "Because you never expected me to say no." He went quiet. Then, finally, in a whisper, "I just wanted to protect our image. I didn't want things to feel messy." I stared out the window, where twilight settled over the city like a soft warning. "You cared more about appearances than about respect. That's why it's messy now." The silence stretched between us, thick and undeniable. "You're different, Mom," he said finally, voice small. "You've changed." I nodded to myself. Yes, I've finally stopped mistaking being quiet for being passive. And that was the truth of it. It was a full week before Daniel finally dared show up again. Saturday morning. No warning, no appointment. Just that familiar knock at my front door, 3 sharp raps, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I didn't rush. I finished pouring my tea. I placed the cup gently on the saucer. Then, and only then, did I open the door. Daniel stood there, looking smaller than I remembered. His suit hung loose on him, like he'd lost weight fast. Eyes ringed with exhaustion. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Mom, can we please talk?" Neutral. Calm. "We're talking." He hesitated, glancing behind him as if Ashley might appear to support him. But he was alone. That, in itself, told me everything. "Please, just let me inside. We need privacy." "There's nothing private about legal obligations, Daniel. You chose the path we're both standing on now." He flinched. "I know we made mistakes. Mistakes. Always mistakes. Never choices." "We? Or you?" I asked quietly. His voice broke then, anger bleeding through. "You've ruined everything. The wedding, my job, our future. You didn't have to let it get this far. We were family." I watched him carefully. Even now, still, his words were about what I had taken from him, not what they had taken from me. "No, Daniel," I said, steady as stone. "You ruined it. When you let Ashley humiliate me, when you saw me as a credit line, not a mother, you set this in motion. I simply stopped enabling it." His fists clenched at his sides. "You could have helped us fix it." "I did help you," I said, voice cooling. "I helped for years. I paid for your education, your house, your wedding deposits. I gave everything because I believed you valued me as your mother. But you only valued my money." His face reddened. "That's not true." I held his gaze. "Then why was I standing outside my own son's wedding, Daniel? Why did Ashley feel comfortable looking me in the eye and saying you weren't invited? Tell me, who taught her that was acceptable?" The silence between us felt like a chasm finally exposed. He had no answer, only shame flickering behind his fury. "I trusted you," I whispered, quieter now, "and you weaponized that trust to build your life while cutting me out of it." His breathing grew ragged. "We can't afford the lawsuits. Ashley's parents pulled everything. I lost the job offer. His voice cracked completely, turning into something raw. "I'm losing everything. Then perhaps," I said softly, "you will finally understand what it feels like to give everything and receive nothing." For the first time since this began, he looked truly cornered, truly powerless. like a child realizing that consequences were real. "Please, Mom," he whispered one last time. "Please." I shook my head. My voice was kind, but firm, like closing the final page of a book I once loved. "I will always be your mother, Daniel. But I am no longer your victim." The weeks that followed unfolded, like the slow settling of dust after an explosion. Not loud, just steady. Vendors filed their suits one after another. The venue, the florist, even the band. Each one legally airtight. Each one naming Ashley's family alongside Daniel. The damages weren't just numbers anymore. They were public record. The whispers turned into open conversations at charity luncheons, country club corridors, and boardrooms where Ashley's parents once held so much sway. Their names, once synonymous with taste and success, were now tethered to default and fraudulent arrangements. But the most telling silence came from Daniel. No more texts, no more calls, no more desperate attempts to spin concern into control. He disappeared behind a wall of shame, or perhaps behind Ashley's anger, because I could see it clearly now. Her loyalty never ran deeper than her ambitions. And without my money bolstering their stage, Ashley's affections had turned sharp, transactional. His deepest wound isn't from the money lost. It's from realizing who would strip you bare without hesitation and still expect your smile after. Gloria came by often, sensing that while I had won the battle, grief had made a quiet home inside me. It's a strange thing, to mourn someone still alive. To grieve the person you raised while confronting the person they chose to become. One evening, she brought fresh-baked scones and her usual irreverence. "Well, darling," she said, placing the warm tray on my kitchen table, "you've become a bit of a quiet legend at the center." I smiled faintly. "A legend?" "Oh, yes. The woman who froze a wedding from the inside out without raising her voice. The one who didn't crumble, didn't yell, didn't even retaliate. Just withdrew." I looked at her, grateful. "I didn't feel strong, Gloria. I just felt necessary." "That is strength." She reached over, resting her hand atop mine. "You taught them all something none of their money ever will. Love without respect is theft. And you stopped being stolen from." The estate remained fully locked under my control. The foundation Marissa helped me set up held my assets safely, ensuring no one would ever be able to circle back and try again. The quiet, distant relatives who once sniffed around after hearing about my prior generosity no longer called. Ashley's family retreated from every social platform they once flaunted. There was nothing more to fix. My chapter with them was over. My story, however, was just beginning again.